Welcome, and the 30 or so of you that are not yet here, welcome. And all of you at home in your bed, welcome as well. This is a conference that's going to deal with regulation, and we have very general kind of stories to be told here, as well as some very specific stories. We have a little bit of theoretical stuff, material which shows the difficulties of regulation, and we have very general. We have country views, and we have very micro views. So we're also going to deal with some marginal cost pricing issues, or TELRIC as it is called in the industry. So that's, I'm happy to thank Ellie for allowing me to organize this, and Jason for putting together all the administrative parts, as well as Corey. So I'm going to introduce Ellie, and he will give us an overview, and then we'll turn to Michael Lipsky from Demos, who will give us a more general overview of regulation and its benefits.
Thank you. And may I suggest nobody sit here, because this is actually wet. This chair. All right, good morning, everybody, and those of us who will still join and are on the way. Thank you, Jim Alleman, and thank you, Jason Buckwhite, who is standing out there and who's made almost all of this happen, together with Corey Spencer, who's there in the back corner. So we're here partly, this was an idea that started out as a workshop and then kind of morphed into a small conference, and now we are here gathered to talk about what? Well, you may have read in the papers or in whatever you get the news that yesterday or so Nokia bought Alcatel-Lucent for $16.6 billion. And this is for a company that 3 years ago was valued $2.5 billion by the stock market. The deal is almost certainly going to be approved by Brussels antitrust regulators. After all, there is no American company involved, like Yahoo when it wanted to buy Daily Motion, so hey, no problem. Remember, this is the agency that would not let MCI merge with Sprint because of their huge market shares in Europe, so they couldn't merge. Now, it now permits that together practically all of the European telecom equipment wireline makers outside of Ericsson, Alcatel, Siemens, Nokia, including the old ITT, Thomson, Newbridge, AEG, Teletra, SEL, STC, plus Lucent, which used to sell in Europe too. All of this is kind of now together. And you'd think, in the same week that Google is being accused of having excessive market power, that there would be a collective horror sigh going on, but quite to the contrary. French President Hollande had a very friendly meeting in the Élysée Palace with the two respective CEOs. Coming out of the meeting, the economics minister provided a policy backing. He said, as reported yesterday, it's a big champion that could compete with Huawei and Chinese champion, says economic minister Emmanuel Macron in the courtyard of the Élysée Palace after the meeting, for a Europe that believes in its digital sovereignty, and for a Europe that wants to conquer new markets. Now, same week, so here we have it, kind of the creation and encouragement of a European champion. Another nail in the coffin of the system that we thought had been overcome by liberalization and privatization of the 80s and 90s. The old system was one in which some kind of a favored supplier, national champion in the electronics field would somehow be the favored supplier of a national monopoly type carrier. And now this is being extended to all of Europe under the flag, under the argument, standing up to America, standing up to China. This is in the same week that Google was charged, to great applause, for using its market power unfairly. It's the same week that the German commissioner on the EU Commission, Günther Oettinger, who is in charge of the Information Society, said that the European Union should regulate internet platforms in a way that allows a new generation of European operators to overtake the dominant US players. Mark the words. Should regulate internet platforms in a way that allows a new generation of European operators to overtake the dominant US players. Okay, so industrial policy is back through the regulatory system. But it's not just a European story. In fairness, China, the whole sector is government owned, and on this side of the Atlantic, we have the President of the United States himself pushing for Title II regulation, that is for common carriage regulation of ISP. So this is all part of a larger shift to the next stage of regulation. And I would characterize this next stage, the context, as there was a first stage which I call Networks 1.0 that led to Regulation 1.0. Everybody's here. As soon as I kind of said all the important things that I have to be said. So Networks 1.0, infrastructure, whether it was in telecom or in TV, leading to a regulated system. Technologically, regulatory-wise, government regulation, often in many countries, government ownership. All right, so this is the old system, and you know about it. But in the 70s, Darcy, don't be disruptive. But in the 70s, we had emerging technologies, alternative currents, microwave, as in MCI, and so on, kind of destabilized the system, and we kind of emerged into the possibility, at least, of multi-providers, and that led to a system of liberalization, and in many countries of privatization that emerged. And so infrastructure 2.0 leading also to a regulation 2.0, and competition was the key element. And economists spread the gospel, and the gospel became orthodoxy. But Network 2.0 was not the end of history. Technology took another major step into the next level, which is the level of fiber, high-capacity distribution platforms, and of high-speed internet, broadband, and platforms such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And so the question is whether the policy approach of infrastructure 2.0 and of regulation 2.0 would also be working in the next stage of network development 3.0. And the answer to that is no. All right, and first just kind of, there are drivers and then there's the reality too. The fundamental drivers that I see, at least, are the following four. One is changing economies of scale. And people basically had assumed somehow that you open things up and there will be competitors, and the competitors will become more powerful, and there will be this kind of nice free-for-all going on. But that's not really what happened. For various reasons. One is simply economies of scale and the network effects. Plus, the old line monopolies had become actually, under some challenge, become more efficient. And therefore they could, I mean, if you could enter as a small entrant because the incumbent was inefficient, there was not that gap narrowed. And so it is true the 100% monopolies, market shares, are a matter of the past, except for China perhaps, but I will kind of give you just from a study, a very large study that we did at CITI, a book that is coming out at Oxford in a few weeks, maybe months, maybe years, just some market shares. Let me start, for example, with cable television. We all know cable television is highly concentrated, and there is this company called Comcast, and they want to merge with Time Warner Cable. Now, I don't think it's a good idea, but just put it in perspective for a moment, okay? Comcast has approximately 22 or so percent before that merger, which will raise it closer to 30%. But look at the market shares of cable. In Italy, 100%. In South Africa, 100%. 100% of the top company. In Switzerland, 74%. In Spain, 74%. In the UK, 73%. In Chile, 65%. Australia, 63%. Turkey, 61%. France, 61%. And so on and so on. That's cable. In telecom, wireline, in almost all countries, you have the incumbent top has more than 60% of the market. There are a few exceptions, but mostly Mexico, 85%, right? And in Spain, almost 80%. In South Korea, 75%. This is in wireline. Our people then say, what about wireless? The solution to all of our problems. Mexico 69%, the incumbent Switzerland 60%, South Africa 53%, South Korea 50%, and so on and so forth. It's true, it's less concentrated, but it's becoming more concentrated. Germany has just gone to a 3-carrier system, and the United States almost went to a 3-carrier system. And so there are these pressures. I could go on with ISPs. And just to tell you, because then people say after they make this wireless is the solution to everything, then the next line of defense is yes, but the internet. Okay, the internet actually is more concentrated than anything. And it's the same economic logic, high fixed costs, low marginal cost. So if you look at ISPs, if you look at search engines, that's the Google issue, if you look at Facebook, whatever it is, there is an early free-for-all where everybody competes against everybody, just like it was with the automobile industry or the aviation industry. But very soon, there's a shaking out and economies of scale take over, markets stabilize, and you have some very large and dominant companies going on, which are not only dominant in their own national market, but globally. And so the internet actually is going to be the most concentrated. And you can see this in country after country. We have the numbers. Okay, now, so this is kind of factor number one, and now I'm going to speed it up. The second fundamental factor is very large investment requirements. I mean, to fiber up Europe will cost $300 billion, similar numbers in the United States. And so in a competitive environment, not many companies can do that, let's face it. And certainly not in rural areas. And so you have these kind of pressures of towards universal service and its subsidization schemes, all these things that we had in the past. Third fundamental change is the migration of telecom, of mass media from over the air to telecom style networks and online type distribution, Netflix type stuff. We're just at the beginning of this. And that means, inevitably, because the media sector is even much more imbued with public interest type issues, what you can do and what you can't do because of the sensitivities, cultural, political, moral, and whatever, that there is much more regulation going to be on telecom infrastructure in its capacity as the carriers of messages, because it's very hard to deal with the million people who send messages, but there are only a handful of companies that provide the infrastructure, and you can grab them. They're physical, they're not virtual. And so that is going to happen. And let's face it, we possibly kind of care greatly about unbundled local loop elements, but let's face it, outside of this room, there are very few people who actually care about the subject. But show on television a nipple, and there will be 1 million letters written to the FCC. So there is a much greater involvement, and that will lead to activism and to all kinds of. Which gets me to my last and fourth drivers, which is the emergence of information activism. Okay, we all know there is open sources and file sharing and net neutrality and copyright, copyleft, and Wi-Fi, free, and there are all these different type strands. We have to connect these dots and understand that we are kind of seeing something that's similar to the emergence of an environmental movement that is not just about the panda bears and the kind of and the rainforest, but about kind of environment. So here too, this information informational activities. Information resources is power, control over information resources, particularly in an age of Googles and Facebooks and so on, becomes kind of important and critical, and therefore people get organized, they get exercised, they write, they do, and this is in some ways, the net neutrality debate is absolutely classic about this, starting out as a bunch of academic ideas, activist groups, and sooner or later the President of the United States breathes down the neck of the chairman of the FCC because his people are telling him that's the politically right thing to do. So, and people do care about this kind of enormously, about media power, much more than economic power. People can handle, Sam Walton wealth, or a Bernard Arnault wealth, or Albrecht Brothers wealth. These are some of the richest people in the world. Albrecht Brothers you probably have never heard of even before. But say the word Silvio Berlusconi, or Marino, or Ascangara, or Rupert Murdoch, and everybody says, whoa. Even though in terms of pure resources, these people are far down the list. I mean, Murdoch is number 83 in wealth in the world. Berlusconi is number 181 in his wealth in the Forbes list of billionaires. Not that we have to worry about these people. So what are the policy implications? We see here certain elements that are coming up. Government focus on infrastructure upgrade, national competitiveness, access requirements, content, content universal service requirements, expanding wholesale pricing rules, governmental subsidies for rural areas for R&D, new regulation, a new role for national champions, spectrum allocations that are used to shape industries. I guess this is a subtle reminder. Use of spectrum allocations in order to shape ownership and to shape other things, breakup of networks into wholesale and infrastructure services. So when you look at all these elements in detail, you will see that they all kind of look pretty much like Regulation 1.0, like the good old days. So have we simply gone full circle? Are we just kind of returning? Is Regulation 3.0 simply a high-speed version of the original system? Is there a certain kind of logic to it that kind of just exerts itself? For example, in the United States, we went through this kind of great divestiture of AT&T. 20 years, there were fights going on. After 20 years, in fact, I did some study on this, comparing it with Canada. And it turns out there's almost no difference. They're kind of two large carriers with some competition from cable. Investments are similar. The equipment industry is bankrupt in both places. I mean, so kind of like it seems kind of pretty much so. What did AT&T die in vain? In other words, so did we actually accomplish anything? Is there some kind of natural equilibrium really that things are happening? And if so, is that natural equilibrium really a social equilibrium? And so to discuss these issues, we have here. We have here first kind of Michael Lipsky, who will talk about the impact of regulation on democracy, and I look forward to hearing this. Based on the abstract, I would say, Michael, that you have won your argument already, so declare victory. Libertarianism, which used to be the ruling philosophy of the internet community at least, that kind of libertarianism has actually disappeared. It's become selective. It's become result-oriented. It has lost credibility. It's become basically leave us alone, but regulate the other guy. Looking ahead, Raoul Katz in the back is a step ahead, discussing the best models of such regulatory system. Mark Cooper, wherever you are, will do the same from a broad historic and forward-looking perspective and propose a new system. Henry Ergas, who I saw here, he just stepped out, will reporting to us, in fact, about renationalization. In Australia, Darcy Gerbach is our rural representative, right? Okay. Heather Hudson goes beyond the Catskills and reaches the north slope of Alaska. Bruce Kushnick will talk about infrastructure investments and their regulation. Judith Mariscal will talk about infrastructure in Mexico. Greg Sayre about New York State and others. Moving to theory, Enrico Rossi provides a theoretical economic role, marginal cost in this breakdown environment. And Jim Alleman similarly will continue this theme of marginal cost, in this case under uncertainty, and challenge the long-run incremental cost methodology. Len Waverman then deals with specific new type style regulatory issue, namely privacy from an economist's perspective. And Jim again will provide an analysis how well or poorly ICT regulation has worked out in OECD countries. So to conclude, liberalization has made sense for the 90s. Priorities have changed. Tomorrow they will change again. Therefore, 3.0 is not going to be the end. There will be a regulation 4.0, no doubt about that. If I had to guess, it'll take a half a generation, 12 to 15 years. These cycles actually compress to get there. And when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, you're invited to come back and to talk about it. Thank you.
Good morning. I had to come to Columbia University to discover that libertarianism is no longer an important theoretical concern, and its time has passed, and we can move on to have a more sensible understanding of the role of government. In the event that this prediction is not entirely accurate, I'm going to offer some views on regulation in general, and I hope you'll bear with me. I think the conference organizers hope to have a broad perspective on regulation in addition to talking particularly about the sector. And that was my assignment, and that's what I'm going to try to do for you in a brief period of time. I'm Michael Lipsky. I'm a senior fellow at Demos. I'm a political scientist. I taught at MIT. I worked at the Ford Foundation. I have some background in public policy. And I have a great interest in having people understand the role of government in structuring our lives and our relationships. And that's how I got into the issue of regulation about 2 years ago. It should be obvious that every society needs rules to live by, and regulations are no more and no less than the laws that we pass, and particularly the ways in which we implement the laws. Regulations are essentially laws, and democracies balance the interests, the variety of interests that people have with, in order to come to a resolution, which hopefully is good, but it certainly reflects power and power distribution, but has a role to play from a democratic point of view, rather than the economist point of view, which I think is dominant in many circles and vexes us as we consider how to proceed. And this is the essence of this remark of Ellie's about libertarianism. So although it might seem obvious that we need rules to live by and to structure emerging ICT developments, as a general matter, the subject of regulation is highly divisive. And I'm not referring to divisiveness over any particular rule. A healthy society is always arguing about its rules. New problems arise, current ways of addressing problems may be ineffective or obsolete. Of course, the country's regulatory framework from time to time needs to be upgraded. And this discussion of how technology has changed and rules change follow is consistent with what I was trying to say. The divisiveness I'm referring to is the proposition that regulation in general is bad for society. But before I want to take this up, I want to first remind us of some of the characteristics of the regulatory regime that we have established. It should be obvious first that our society is vastly more livable than it used to be, because we have adopted rules to protect the public from things that it can't protect itself from. Examples include building codes, auto safety requirements, clean air and water, civil rights protections, safe working environments. All of those obvious benefits to society were highly contested and took surprisingly long periods of time to enact. And if we imagine that 40 years from now we look back, we might see the highly contested aspects of whatever it is that the country produces in the next few years around the ICT sector. A second characteristic of the regulatory framework is that it's always changing because technology changes, standards change, diagnostic ability improves, the classes of people deemed in need of protection changes. And so we have to expect that regulation will change too. Regulations are always highly contested because they distribute power, just like laws and politics do. And that's something that we should expect. Using the example of building codes, it would seem obvious that after the great fires of the early 20th century, the cities would produce laws that fireproof buildings. The real estate interests were very, very opposed to building codes because they would hurt the bottom line, they didn't want to change, whatever. It took decades to get as something as obvious to us in this period as building codes enacted, and you can see the same kind of developments in all of the sectors. An additional aspect of the regulatory system is that most business leaders appreciate the system of laws and that structure their relationship with their competitors and with the public. Our system of laws and regulations provides the basis for successful commerce. Business depends upon our regulatory structure, and here are a couple of reasons why that's so. First of all, in many sectors, the public belief that there are systems of laws that protect them is good for business because people have confidence in the sector. Who would feed a can of beans to his or her children if we didn't think that the laws supported them? In the peanut scare of 2009 that you may remember, the head of Kellogg Foods went to the Congress and said, would you please regulate us a little bit more because we can't do all the regulation that the public expects if we are going to be a system that gives the impression that we're safe. So additional reasons that the business community supports the law is that regulation is appreciated because it discourages illegitimate businesses or marginal businesses or shady businesses, businesses that would injure the reputation of the sector. A good business person is somebody who is happy to abide by the rules so long as everyone is affected by and governed by the rules, and that the rules are administered fairly. The world of commerce is vast and business interests are not monolithic. Even when some businesses object to particular regulations, other businesses support them. For example, clean air standards proposed by the EPA may be opposed by coal companies in Kentucky, but clean air standards are welcome by all the businesses in the state and other states that depend on tourists attracted to the mountain air of Appalachia. I know this is true in the ICT sector, although I can't give you the particulars. Some are advantaged, some are disadvantaged, but it's certainly not a one-way thing. And of course, business interests are very good at shaping the rules that they have to live by. They intervene through lobbying in the making of the rules. They interfere with they succeed in lobbying the executive, and they shape the rules very substantially to their liking. So, despite the proposition that business is hardly the enemy of rules, or rules is hardly the enemy of business, why do we hear that regulations are destructive to the well-being of society? So the basis for this assertion comes from economic theory that pure markets, unencumbered by rules, will produce optimal results, guided by no greater intelligence than everyone pursuing his or her self-interest. This is the basis for the opposition to regulation promoted relentlessly and apparently now fruitlessly by libertarian theorists and their followers, as well as the Chamber of Commerce and other business interests. Many of us, or most of us in the room, will have taken Economics 101 or have absorbed its lessons, and we've learned or taught that free markets yield optimal results when pure market conditions apply, but our understanding of market dynamics in the real world has evolved. We now know that markets require regulation because of the fundamental assumptions of free market theory that independent buyers and sellers come together with full information and knowing their interests rarely apply in the real world. If these conditions don't apply, then markets cannot be expected to produce the predicted results. Some of the areas that you're familiar with that where the real world is inconsistent with the pure market theory is that when one party to the transaction lacks vital information, the information asymmetry that results means that the market can't work efficiently as it's supposed to in pure market theory. Another way in which the pure market theory doesn't work, everybody knows, is when conditions of multiple sellers doesn't exist, and Ellie talked about this to some degree. Another is that when regulations correct for the unacceptable negative impacts of market behavior, we call those avoiding the externalities. So we have regulations, environmental regulations, obviously, because we, as a democracy, think that we all have an interest in clean air, and people using the air as a common dump for their pollution is not acceptable. And there are other reasons that I could go into about why the pure market theory doesn't work. So I'm being signaled to get off the stage here. So I want to sort of end with this. Historically, governments have been responsible for creating markets and setting their rules. I sell vegetables at farmers markets on a regular basis. I was surprised to discover that in colonial America, every large city in the country built a market and established the rules of trade for food in order to ensure that their citizens would have access. When governments are not establishing markets, they're subsidizing them, as in the case of promoting airlines through airmail delivery contracts. Or they're structuring their creation, as in the case of railroads, or creating the infrastructure that allows creating the infrastructure that allows markets to develop, as in the case of canals and farm-to-market roads. When governments are not subsidizing markets, they're improving them by requiring labeling of foods and drugs. The voluminous evidence of how public authorities precede markets, establish them, set their rules, and subsidize them, documented again and again, thoroughly discredits the notion promoted by free market theorists that markets are the preeminent social institutions. So the conclusion that I would urge you to recognize is that markets must be both protected and enhanced to encourage innovation, to keep costs down, to provide access to people, to broad access to people, to achieve other social values. Markets are important in the regulatory system, but they're not the only interests that are involved. And the market capitalism that we enjoy and prosper from works best when government works with business to create rules that meet the common good. I'm exhausted and my heart is racing. Thanks very much. I'm sorry to have to rush through this. I'd be glad to elaborate on any of this if you're interested.
We want to encourage conversation here, not only one-way communication. So let me start this by saying the following. See, I mean, I think accepting all that you have said, Michael, still the indictment of the regulatory system is at least two. One, that it is it is soon controlled not by the goals of public interest, by the ability of the various stakeholders to get results that are actually protectionist to their interest. And number two, that the system is not cost-free. That just the process itself is so convoluted and slow-moving that it is actually in the way. And so therefore, I think the best argument that could be made perhaps is to say maybe kind of not doing anything, not regulating is the lesser of the evils. So what would you respond to that?
Every institution requires fixing and continual renewal, and that's true of big businesses, religious organizations, nonprofit associations, and government. So we have a problem of governance that is substantial, and we need to, if our system of laws and regulations are slowing us down or cumbersome or redundant and so on, we need to fix that. But that's a problem of democracy, not a problem of markets, and not a problem of regulation as such. So, and to the leap, my problem, show me any regulation and I will be glad to discuss how it could be improved. But the idea and the leap that we have inefficient regulatory structures, the leap from that to say we shouldn't have any is much too great, because it ignores the public protections that are built into the regulations and explains their origins in the first place. Now, we see a lot of examples where politicians think that they are going to appeal to the public when they say, well, let's just review and cut out all those bad regulations. Well, reasonable people can agree that we should and can always review our regulatory system. But when the bias of that move is that we want to have just fewer regulations, that you're essentially saying something like, we want to empower some interests over other interests by reducing the rules, because in an environment in which there are fewer rules, people without power are disadvantaged.
Jim is running the show.
We're only going to take one more question because we're a little bit over time, but go ahead, Judith.
But it's not my fault. I just want to say.
You've been talking
We're
about,
exactly on time.
you mentioned democracy, and when thinking where to draw the line between regulation, government involvement or not, would you agree more than an abstract concept, it has to do with process, with the participation of the stakeholders in democratic due process policy design?
Would you?
That whether it's going to a bundling or doing this or that, what really matters is if the design of the regulation was involving the stakeholders.
That sounds very democratic to me. I don't think, democracy is more than voting, which, by the way, is the acronym is DIM TV, if anyone is interested. So the democratic process is intrinsic, and participation is intrinsic to my understanding of what a democratic process is all about. The American system actually has remarkable requirements of participation. That doesn't mean that those that all voices will be heard. All voices can't always be heard. But the requirements that people have an opportunity to participate are really pretty extensive if you study it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop this now. At the coffee break, we can have some more questions. Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
Thank you, Ellie.